Jacob, can you hear us?
Loud and clear.
What's going on, guy?
Well, it's great to be here, Gavin.
You know, I was choosing the opening song for today's show, and I was considering a great song by the band Generation X, Billy Idol's old band, called Revenge.
Yeah, well, that's what it is. I mean, I'll tell you that it was very surprising to me to wake up one morning and see that Michael Avenatti had blamed me for his domestic violence arrest, and that's exactly what he did. And I thought maybe he was joking, but he wasn't kidding. And he said that he was going to take me down and he was going to come for me and come for my family if it was the last thing he ever did. And so what do you do in that situation when you have an unhinged lunatic who has openly declared that he's going to come after you, somebody who at the time was armed with great resources?
Well, he said, I'm coming for you, Jacob Wohl. It's the intro to your show on censored.tv.
Right. Exactly. That's what he said.
Is there any truth to what he said?
No, there's no truth to it. I mean, what happened was that he got in a big fight with his then 23-year-old or 24-year-old girlfriend, Morelli Minuti. She and the neighbors called the police, and allegedly what happened is she was dragged through the hallway and beaten by him. Mm-hmm. The police arrested him on the spot, and he brought in high-priced lawyers. It was kicked down to the LA City Attorney, who never filed the case because at the time he was still a darling of the Democrat Party. He was on cable news nonstop.
Oh, well, we have a clip here when he was on The View, and what's her name? Anna Navarro. I always forget her name. She said that you remind me of the Holy Spirit, God's messenger to the rest of us. Play that?
You're like the Holy Spirit. You are... Lately, to me, you're like the Holy Spirit. You are all places at all times, right? I mean, I do. I see you all over cable news. I see you. You know, there is a seat available if you want to be a co-host at The View. You might. You know, there's people here you can pitch. Lately, to me, you're.
They worshiped the ground he walked on. They wanted him to run for president.
They did, and the crazy part is that he was known within Orange County. I mean, before he was famous, he went to the same gym as I did.
Oh.
And he was in the area, and he was known as sort of a sleazy civil litigator. But as it turned out, and as I dug into his background and started going to his debtor's examination hearings, wherein his law partners, his former law partners, were trying to figure out where all the money went, it turns out that he got into the business of just stealing from his clients. And as a commercial attorney, a civil litigator, somebody handling class actions, he was entrusted within attorney-client trust accounts with tremendous amounts of money. And you can do basically anything as a lawyer, but the one thing you can't do is steal from the attorney-client trust account. And that's what he started doing, to the tune of more than $100 million in Southern California.
Well, I remember Tucker interrogating him on the show, saying, "Why doesn't Stormy get any of this money? How's she doing? She's stripping at some dirtbag town, riding the pole, and then signing, letting people touch her tits and signing autographs for God knows how little money, $300. And you're loaded. Why don't you pass some of the money over, you creepy porn lawyer?"
Well, yeah, and as it turns out, one of the indictments, so he was sentenced on one of the cases today. There's two other cases. This was the case concerning, blackmailing and trying to extort Nike using his Twitter account, which, by the way, he's never been banned from Twitter even still, even though he used his Twitter account to extort $25 million from Nike, or almost managed to do so before he was arrested in progress.
Help us layman out. What was he threatening to do? He had pictures of Nike in the bath with an underage girl, or at
well, he was going to hold a press conference claiming that Nike was paying high school and college athletes illegally, and that he was going to crash their stock as a result of this press conference and drive it down to zero unless they paid him $20 million to conduct an internal investigation. In other words, that's the auspices under which they're paying him, but it's just hush money. And he did this in a meeting in which he and Mark Garagos were attempting to drive out this money from Nike's lawyers at Boies Schiller Flexner in New York City.
Wow. So they came at him like Thor's hammer and got him 30 months for, what's the charge? Is it extortion?
It's extortion, conspiracy to commit extortion, and honest services wire fraud, because he held the meeting with them under the guise of, I'm here representing my client who runs an AAU basketball team, and you pulled the money from him. But it turns out he wasn't interested in representing his client at all. He just wanted $25 million for himself. And this client was going to be the one who was going to be the whistleblower. But he duped his client too, so he was also convicted on that charge, 3 counts in New York City. And Mark Garagos was alongside him. This is part of the reason that he was only sentenced to 2.5 years as opposed to 9 years, which is the mandatory minimum. And that's because the judge looked at the prosecutors and said, well, if this is so serious, why didn't you also indict Mark Garagos, who was the 50-50 partner in all of this? And they didn't have a good answer, and it's not clear why they didn't. He didn't cooperate. He didn't testify in the case. Maybe he was just more connected with the Democrat Party than Avenatti was.
Or maybe he was a snitch? You don't think he was snitching?
Well, no, because if, in fact, he testified even in private, Avenatti would have a right to cross-examine him. All that would come out in the case, and it never did. So they didn't need it, but it's just very strange that he wasn't indicted. And so Avenatti, you talk about Stormy Daniels, one of the other indictments, another New York indictment, as he was doing that interview with Tucker Carlson, Stormy Daniels finalized a lucrative book deal where she was paid an advance of $300,000. Avenatti changed the paperwork, had the money wired to his account instead of hers, and just stole the money. Just stole the $300,000 that she was supposed to get for a book, out and out. Just took it.
Wow. So what do you think? So he's in jail for 2.5 years, but while he's sitting there, these other trials are going to go on, right? And that could just add to his time.
Well, the big one is out of California. That's the big case. That's a 36-count indictment that includes bank fraud, wire fraud. But those are just all the sort of ancillary charges that come as a result of all this dirty money. And the dirty money comes as a result of stealing from his clients. One of the best examples, one that I uncovered by going to his debtor's exam hearings, which were just civil hearings. But what happened was, when people say, oh, Jacob, you took down Avenatti, what they mean is that he had all these civil problems, but they were just that. They were civil. His old ex-law partner suing him, stuff like that. But what I did is I went to these hearings at the time writing for the Gateway Pundit, and I made it so that he couldn't sit in these hearings and just take the fifth, because if he did, he'd be embarrassed. I'd write about it. And so he talked himself into this 36-count indictment in these debtor's exam hearings in Los Angeles, with me sitting there, and next to me sitting an assistant U.S. attorney and an IRS investigator. And they were just taking notes as he incriminated himself. And one of the cases was a guy named Jeffrey Johnson, who was a sort of a schizophrenic who was in and out of Los Angeles County Jail a lot. At one point, he swan dived over the bars of the jail from 3 stories up, somehow was just fine, got up off the ground. It's sort of that crackhead longevity where
it's
you
like
just
retard strength.
Right, they just don't get injured somehow. But he did it a second time. The second time he was paralyzed. And Avenatti was his lawyer. They sued the county of L.A. Of course, the county settled for $5 million. Avenatti stole all the money from this mentally retarded, mentally ill paraplegic. Just took it, told the guy, hey, it's coming next week. Listen, I can loan you $2,000, but the money hasn't arrived. Meanwhile, he took the money, and with the money was renting a house in Newport Beach for $72,000 a month, had this full floor office at Fashion Island in Newport Beach, $250,000 a month, which made no sense because it was a one-man law firm and he had a full floor looking out over the Pacific, and all this art. I mean, these Frank Gehry sculptures and a Ferrari and all of this. And it was, the YouTuber Michelle Phan, the makeup gal, for whatever reason, she hired him to handle the sale of her company. She sold the company for $25 million. It went into Avenatti's attorney-client trust account, and he just stole it. Just took it.
Amazing.
And for whatever reason, he didn't leave the country. He's an Italian citizen. He would travel to Italy with his Italian passport, but he just stuck around, and he was too addicted to the limelight. When you're up $100+ million, he should have left.
The left propped him up so much, he got addicted to the attention. He's on The View. They want him to run for president, and he just started believing all that hype. But you need to fund that, so he turned himself into God and fucked himself.
I mean, he was stealing even before he was a celebrity. He was stealing from his clients going back to 2014, 15, when nobody knew who he was. But he's up I think the total comes out to 130 some odd $million he stole.
Holy shit.
Just right out of the accounts.
So what does your gut say after the other 2 indictments are done, the other 2 cases? What does your gut say his time's going to be in total with Stormy and then the crazy 32 indictment thing?
Well, there's always a chance he can just cut some kind of a plea deal here, and that might be a good idea after today when he got up and said it's all my fault. I destroyed my life. Those are very incriminating statements he made today, as it relates to this other trial or trials that he's got coming up. And so he may cut a plea deal for something like 20 years total, or perhaps 15 years total. But in the absence of that, the Stormy sentencing probably is another 2 or 3 years, because in the grand scheme of things, it's $300,000. Normally, the feds don't even intervene in something that small.
Right.
But the 36-count indictment, that's where you're talking about potentially 20 or 30-year type sentences.
Isn't it amazing that the left hates Trump so much that they find a guy who found someone or is working with someone who says she fucked Trump and it sucked, and they go, this guy's a god. Like,
well, yeah, and he was a porn lawyer. This is the other part. He was this commercial litigator in Orange County and had this sort of highbrow business, or somewhat highbrow, where he'd go out and, sue like a hospital gown maker because people got Ebola blood on them or something, and he'd sue a fertilizer manufacturer. And by the way, these judgments that he got for $500 million and what have you, they were almost always lowered to much less, or in some cases zero, on appeal. But he would do that. But on the side, he would drive up to the San Fernando Valley, and he would hang around with a lot of porn stars, and he was in the porn world, and that's how he came into contact ultimately with Stormy Daniels. She had another attorney first, but he was in the San Fernando Valley porn, coke world. He was a major cokehead, had a $20,000 a month coke habit. I mean, serious, addiction.
It's a lot of blow.
Yeah.
What a lech. What a loser. Well, I'm glad you got your revenge, Jacob. It's fun when someone says they're coming for you and you turn around and they're in prison. Fantastic.
Well, and a part of me wishes it's like somebody breaks into your house and you shoot them dead, and it's good that you're alive and they aren't, but you kind of just wish they hadn't broken into your house. And that's like Avenatti. I kind of wish he would have just stayed, shaking down soulless mega corporations from Orange County, but it is what it is.
Well, you should say that to people from now on. Please don't fuck with me. I don't want to hurt you. I want you to lead a normal life. Please.
Right. Exactly. Just keep running your Ponzi scheme. It's fine.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for coming to the show, man. I'll talk to you soon.
You bet.